I would like to welcome our witnesses. We have Vicki Eatridges, the chairperson and CEO at the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. She is joined by Scott Hutton, the Vice President, Consumer Analytics and Strategy, Scott Shortliff, Vice President, Broadcasting, and Rachel Frenette, the General Counsel and Executive Director, Legal Services. So with that, Ms. Eatridges, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm joined today by colleagues who have already been introduced. We have Scott and Scott to make things easier, and our Senior Legal Counsel, Rachel Frenette. We are very pleased to be here as the committee studies Bill C-15. And before we get into committee members' questions, perhaps we could start with a brief overview of the CRTC and the work that we are doing for Canadians. Comme vous le savez, le CRTC est un tribunal.
As you know, the CRTC is an independent quasi-judicial tribunal that regulates the Canadian communications sector in the public interest. We hold public consultations on telecommunications and broadcasting matters, and we make decisions based on the public record. The Commission consists of 9 members, and we are supported by a team of expert staff that help us to make informed decisions.
15, which makes an amendment to the Broadcasting Act. But let me begin by briefly touching on our other major line of work, which is telecommunications. In meetings with Canadians across the country, we hear about how critical high-quality internet and cell phone services are for employment, for healthcare, education, connecting with loved ones, and so much more. We also hear about what happens when there is a lack of meaningful connectivity, and those stories are troubling. In 2019, the CRTC launched a broadband fund as part of a government-wide effort to help connect rural, remote, and Indigenous communities across Canada. Since then, we have allocated funding to projects delivering internet and cell phone services to over 54,000 homes in over 320 communities. These projects are connecting critical institutions like schools, healthcare facilities, and community centers that people rely on every single day. The CRTC's work to improve connectivity goes hand in hand with our efforts to strengthen competition and to make telecom services more affordable. One way we are helping to provide Canadians with more choice is by allowing competitors to sell plans using the networks of the large telecommunications companies. For internet services, more than a dozen companies are using the access granted by our framework to provide competitive plans to Canadians. And for cell phone services, competitors have expanded into 88 communities across 7 provinces. So what does that mean? It means that there's more choice for Canadians when they are looking for internet and cell phone plans. And we are also seeing some positive movement on prices. For example, according to StatsCan, prices for cell phone services decreased by over 37% over the past 4 years. At the same time, we know that networks are expensive to build and to maintain. So we've put measures in place to make sure that companies keep investing. So making sure that Canadians have access to high-quality networks and to choice is one part of the equation. The other part is making sure that we can easily find those choices and switch to plans that meet their needs. Last year, we launched a Consumer Protection Action Plan to help protect and empower Canadians. And to bring that plan to life, we initiated public proceedings dealing with everything from preventing bill shock to limiting fees to making it easier to compare offers and to switch plans. We will issue those decisions in the weeks and months to come, so stay tuned. Voilà donc un aperçu de notre travail du quotidien.
So that is some of the work that we do in telecommunications. Now I will share a bit about what we're doing in broadcasting. As you know, through the Online Streaming Act, Parliament entrusted us with the mandate to modernize Canada's broadcasting framework and ensure that online streaming services make meaningful contributions to Canadian and Indigenous content. Overhauling the decades-old regulatory framework is no small task. The changes that are required are substantial and complex. One of our first key decisions under the new legislation required online streaming service to direct funding to areas of immediate need, such as local news on radio and television, French language, and Indigenous content. This will result in is to support the Canadian broadcasting system, and we will be issuing other major decisions in the coming months.
Yet, but we're helping make real meaningful progress. More Canadians now have access to high-speed internet. There are more choices when it comes to cell phone services. Stronger consumer protections are coming, and the broadcasting system is evolving to better reflect Canada of today and tomorrow. Merci encore.
Thank you, Ms. Trudees. We will begin now with 6 minutes from Ms. Thomas, please.
Thank you. Ms. Trudees, I'm just curious with regards to Bill C-11. It's been on your plate for just about 2 years now. I'm curious as to how much has been spent on preparing for the implementation of Bill C-11.
So let me share very briefly what we've been doing on Bill C-11.
It's okay. I'm not asking for an outline of things that have been done. I'm just asking for the monetary amount that has been spent.
Okay, I'm not sure that we have those numbers at our fingertips, but I'm just turning to our head of broadcasting. We would be able to get that figure to you.
Okay, and that figure can be sent over to the committee then?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much. With regards to Bill C-11 and Bill C-18, I'm curious as to, since their passing, what type of analysis has been done in terms of their impact on subscription prices, reduced service options, content being blocked or downgraded. What type of analysis has the CRTC done in terms of the impact of Bill C-11 and C-18 on these things?
So Bill C-11 gave us a mandate to modernize the Act, and so we've been taking a number of steps to do that. We have put in place base contributions, bringing in the online streamers, which was what we were asked to do by Parliament. We have also put in place a new definition for Canadian content, and we're taking measures to support.
I'm just going to take you back to my question. In your opening statement, you used the word choice multiple times, being on the side of the consumer multiple times. If that truly is the desire of the CRTC, then I would imagine that some analysis has been done with regards to Bill C-18 and C-11 and making things more affordable. Has that taken place?
So again, in terms of the mandate under the Online Streaming Act and putting that in place, what we've been asked to do is bring in the online streamers as broadcasters, which is what we've been working on, and that's why we have our initial base contributions decision. And the work continues in terms of putting these measures in place.
So do you expect that consumer prices would go up or down based on Bill C-11?
Again, I would come back to our mandate, and our mandate is to ensure that the online streamers are brought into the system, and the other objectives of the Act, which are to support Canadian and Indigenous content, and that's what we've been focused on.
Okay, so absolutely no care of the consumer whatsoever in the considerations and deliberations that take place at the CRTC.
So again, what we've been doing is holding public proceedings, which includes hearing from various consumer groups, and you know, I can tell you that in the context of the Canadian content hearing, we heard from 500 interveners. We heard live from almost 80. So we've heard a wide range of perspectives on this, and what we're putting in place is what Parliament has asked us to do.
What's the number one benefit that you're hearing from consumers?
To ensure that we are supporting areas that are important, like local news, like French content, Indigenous content. So that's what we're hearing in terms of what Canadians are asking for.
And what would the number one drawback be? What are they concerned about with the implementation of Bill C-11? You said you've heard from over 500 consumer groups. What's their top concern?
Well, again, it comes back to the issues that we've been talking about. People are very focused on wanting to make sure that we have support for things like news. We've heard a lot about the importance. People are concerned, as I think we all hear about from Canadians, about loss of news and that kind of content.
So I hear from quite a few people in my office as well. I wouldn't know the exact number, but it would be well over 100. And the top two concerns that I hear, it would be in the thousands actually, if I do that math correctly. And the top concerns that I hear about are the protection of freedom, choice, speech, access to information. And the second thing that I hear a lot about is just consumer pricing. They're concerned that with increased regulation, consumer pricing will go up. I'm surprised that neither of these were mentioned by you, and so I'm curious as to why we're hearing conflicting things.
So I would say that freedom of expression and the free flow of information is a fundamental principle on both the telecommunications work that we do and on the broadcasting side as well. In terms of pricing on the broadcasting side, that's for private companies. We don't regulate the price of broadcasting.
No, but your regulation does cause prices to go up.
We are focused on putting in place the measures that Parliament has asked us to.
But just a moment ago, you also said that you're focused on making things more affordable for Canadians and being on the side of the consumer.
That's correct, and there are a lot of examples of the work that we've been doing to ensure more affordability, which is having more choice.
And so I'm just curious how Bill C-11 falls into that example of creating greater affordability.
Well, when I was talking about creating better affordability, that was in the context of our telecommunications work in terms of internet pricing and cell phone pricing.
Okay, so it's probably more reasonable to expect that Bill C-11 will actually cause the prices to go up.
I can't speak to what private companies do. We don't regulate.
But there will be a greater regulatory burden that they will have to carry, correct?
They do have to comply with regulations.
Okay. And will they be expected to change their algorithm?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. That concludes the time for this round. We will continue with Mr. Sawatsky for 6 minutes, please.
Hello, thank you for coming today. I just wanted to bring our topic over to the scam calls, unsolicited calls. I'm sure we all get them. I certainly get quite a few, not only calls but also texts. At a previous meeting, we had RCMP Chief Superintendent Michael Segbini here, and I had asked about this question as well, and he said that the RCMP has worked with telcos to try to minimize this. So just, I guess, for context here, these calls are not only a problem, but they pose consumer protection risks for seniors, vulnerable populations who might be targeted through phishing and fraud schemes. If you could speak on what enforcement actions the CRTC is currently undertaking to investigate and prevent such calls or texts, including spoofs and abandoned robocalls, and maybe just a note to how effective those measures have been in reducing scam calls for Canadians.
So perhaps I can start off, and I might turn things over to my colleague Scott to provide more detail. Certainly, we hear a lot about scam calls, and they are absolutely a nuisance at best, and sometimes fraudulent at worst. There is a government-wide effort to tackle these issues. So we do work with the Privacy Commissioner and the Competition Bureau to promote compliance with CASL, so the Canada's anti-spam law. So we do that. So we do work within a civil regime. We have a small but mighty team that works on that. So the main thing that we do on that front is to promote compliance. But again, working with law enforcement who has a criminal aspect as well. I don't know if you want to add some details.
Yeah, what we've also found very much that helps in the work, as Vicky mentioned, as our chair mentioned, very much we're in a civil regime, and we end up collaborating with civil partners that we've mentioned, but also with those who do look at cybercrime and who are, with respect to actual fraud on that front. And really much in light of our role, certainly we're able to share and participate and gain knowledge and share our knowledge with those parties. But very much it's working collaboratively to provide prevention, to advising Canadians what are the most recent scams, things that we're hearing through the Spam Reporting Centre, things that we hear from actual complaints filed with us and those that we are investigating. We can't quite share the investigations in light of, the very nature of them being investigations with you, but certainly we are continuing on that front. But what is very, very helpful is helping and arming Canadians with the information needed for them to make sure they can protect themselves.
Thank you very much. Switching the topic over to local media, of course, there's been a profound transformation over the past decade. Traditional revenue models that once funded Canadian programming, like cable and television subscriptions, are declining, and then, of course, other streaming platforms have grown. So the CRTC's new digital broadcasting regulatory framework, it requires online streaming services to financially contribute to the creation, production, and promotion of Canadian content. So can the CRTC, if you could provide an estimate of the projected annual financial contributions that online streaming platforms will now be required to make under the new regulatory framework, and how much reinvestment this is expected to generate for Canada's cultural production ecosystem?
So as part of the Online Streaming Act that was given to us by Parliament, we were directed to bring online streamers into the regime. We fairly quickly held a proceeding and a public hearing on base contributions. So to start to get that money flowing fairly quickly, we certainly heard about a need, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of local news and the importance of news and some of the challenges that are being faced. So we did issue a decision on base contributions that is expected to bring in an estimated $200 million per year. So that is the base contributions. And the work continues in terms of the actual expenditures for each of the companies. So we're continuing to work on that.
Thank you. Chair, sorry, how long do I have left?
1.5 minutes.
1.5 minutes. Okay, so I was reading about the next generation 911, which would represent a critical modernization of Canada's emergency communications infrastructure. Unlike legacy 911 systems, NG911 enables Canadians to access emergency services through voice, text, real-time video, and data transmission, which improves response capabilities, especially for persons with disabilities in crisis situations. Implementing NG911 requires substantial investment into telecom network upgrades, cybersecurity protections, data management systems, and public safety answering point modernization. Given the scale of these infrastructure and operational costs, it would be great if you could explain how CRTC is overseeing the national rollout of Next Gen 911, what's the total estimated cost of the implementation, and what safeguards are in place to ensure that the public safety upgrades don't disproportionately increase costs for consumers.
So perhaps I can start, and I don't know if we'll have time to go for any detail, perhaps not. But what I would say there is, I mean, obviously, I think we all know how important and critical 911 is to Canadian safety. This is an issue that we've been looking at for some time and have been consulting on very broadly. We have been hearing from...
Apologies, I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. On va continuer avec
We'll
Monsieur
continue now with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back closer to the bill that we are looking into, C-15. I know that you can't always tell. That's what we're talking about. And if I am understanding, this bill wants to correct a cancellation or a deletion that was made, rather. I know that it is technical, but could you please explain, in concrete terms, what was the mistake exactly that was committed when it comes to protections for privacy, perhaps with concrete examples? And was the privacy of Canadian citizens jeopardized with that error? Because that is what we are dealing with today. Perhaps to begin, I could say that privacy is our utmost priority. So with every decision that we do take, we take into consideration Canadians' privacy. That is always the case. And I know that there was a mistake that was committed, but I can assure you that we have always taken privacy into consideration. Perhaps just to provide explanation, I can ask Rachel, our lawyer, to answer. So, Madam Chair, to explain a bit of context around the provision that this committee is currently studying, based on our understanding, this is a legislative provision that is interpretative, by nature. In the work that we carry out, the Commission must examine privacy issues in the subjects that it looks into. There were some changes and adoptions made in Parliament of legislative measures, and inadvertently, this interpretative text was deleted. What I can tell you about our work is that the Commission has always taken into consideration privacy issues. For example, when we start public hearings, we are also subject to the Privacy Act like all other federal institutions, which means that we must respect all of the provisions under that act. There are also other statutory measures, including under the Broadcasting Act, that have an impact on Canadians' privacy. So we have undertaken our work in full consciousness of the privacy issues in the regulatory work that we do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's clear enough. So what I'm understanding is this. There was a change, a legislative change that was made that is here to put a Band-Aid over the boo-boo, and it was and now I would like to come back to the minister's testimony from earlier. We were talking about the role of the state in TV broadcasting, and he answered me that it was the state's role to fund CBC because only I'm not an expert in broadcasting, and I was under the impression that the CRTC regulates traditional television for all channels. The minister might have made a mistake when he spoke. Thank you for the question. I wasn't here for the minister's testimony, so I can't comment on his remarks, but we are responsible for the whole system. So that includes traditional radio and TV. It also includes online services now. And in the Broadcasting Act, it is clear that this is all one system, and we are responsible for regulating all of it. Thank you very much. I just have a minute and a half left, so I'll ask you shorter questions. Often when we look at the CRTC's work, when people from the industry look at what you do, for example, they get the impression that it takes you a very long time to render your decisions. Could something be done to speed up CRTC decision-making on the regulatory process? So just to start answering, unfortunately, that is not the first time we have been asked that question. So I think as a quasi-judiciary tribunal, naturally, we do have to adhere to processes. We have, for example, public hearings, and we need to hear from all stakeholders who are interested parties. So in and of itself, that takes time. I can speak to some things that could be done, but I know we don't have much time. Yes, I might leave you the remaining time, but is are funding resources an issue? Do you have enough funding? What are the main reasons why it takes so long to reach a decision? Well, we know that industry players often have to wait for long times. We know that this is the nature of our work. It's because we have such formal processes. That sort of thing takes time, like the public hearings. As I mentioned, we had 500 interveners for one case alone on the definition of Canadian content. It's very time-consuming. We've also held a public hearing that lasted for 3 weeks, and there are many different points of view to be taken into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Garon.
5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, witnesses, for being here, officials. So I'd like to go back to the Online Streaming Act and specifically the new definition of Canadian content that the CRTC has set out. What is the mechanism by which streaming companies that fall under the Act, whether it's YouTube or Netflix or a podcast platform, is expected to conform to its obligations?
So what we are working toward through these various proceedings, and there's some more to come. We have other public proceedings that are ongoing. Through those decisions, we will be moving to conditions of service, and those will apply to specific companies.
But in effect, they would have to make sure that their algorithms conform to serve up the required amount of content that you've said is fitting that new definition, correct?
So the Act actually prohibits us from regulating algorithms, so we don't do that.
How are they supposed to ensure that they're offering up the right balance of CRTC approved content without an algorithm change?
Perhaps I'll turn this over to our head of broadcasting to provide more detail.
Yeah, we have certain decisions that are still before us, but what I can say is we ask questions about discoverability. Discoverability is more than algorithms. We had several of the streamers intervene in those proceedings and bring to our attention the amounts they already spend on promoting Canadian content, what they do in terms of billboards, promotions, what they do in terms of bringing Canadian artists forward. By their own testimony, they've said there are many ways they can make content discoverable. We are now examining whether we will build rules around those. Those decisions are still forthcoming. But I will say the concept of discoverability is not the same as algorithms because, as the chair said, the Act clearly says we will not make orders regulating the use of specific computer algorithms or source code.
So you mentioned advertising. So you're saying that YouTube could satisfy its obligations by running a billboard campaign promoting heated rivalry, but not changing anything about the YouTube homepage or the user suggestions? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that we ask questions about what are the best ways to promote Canadian content and make them discoverable because it was an objective in the Act.
But you've had several years. You've had several years of this already. So I feel like you're saying that you don't prescribe an algorithm, knowing full well that in order to conform to the regulations, these streaming companies will have to modify their algorithms. Can you give me an example of how they would meet your definition or your expectation without having to amend their algorithms?
If I could just take this in two parts. First of all, our definition is definitions of Canadian content that is applied throughout the system. It's not necessarily about promoting specific shows. In terms of how they could meet that, that is a subject of a public consultation and a forthcoming decision. And because we're a quasi-judicial tribunal, I can't give you examples at this time.
Okay. So we're just supposed to just trust that it'll all work out? Is that the expectation on Canadians?
I think that the CRTC always expects that Canadians will hold us to account when our decisions come out, and we will be pleased to answer questions when our decisions come out.
Consumers desire a variety of things. There are Canadians, people that live in Canada that represent diverse backgrounds that may prefer to watch content from their home country or in a different language. In the past, CRTC has actively fought certain aspects of consumer preference. A notable example of this is, the SIM subbing debate from some years ago, where Canadians wanted to be able to access American Super Bowl ads, and the CRTC erred against consumer choice. So what safeguards are in place to ensure that this isn't going to happen with online streaming regulations?
Well, what I could say is we will act within the ambit of the law that Parliament has given us. SimSub is a very complicated discussion, but I will say that the CRTC actually brought in a rule saying that Canadians could watch the Super Bowl on whatever platform they wished. However, we were taken to court. The Supreme Court of Canada found that we had exceeded our powers in that respect.
So what's the recourse available if a platform is not complying with the framework that's set out? I won't name any, but let's say that there's a company that doesn't believe this has all that much authority, but they meet what you believe is the threshold for it. What can CRTC do to force compliance or disconnect service in Canada?
I think, sorry, I'm just trying to parse your question and make sure that I answer it correctly. Forgive me if I'm
If someone doesn't comply, what do you have available?
If someone doesn't comply, we have an escalating series of measures we can take that start with a warning letter that can go to a mandatory hearing. At the most extreme level, Parliament has now given us the possibility of administrative monetary penalties, which is a tool we have not used to date. So we have a variety of tools. I think the
could you shut off access to a website in Canada?
We have no power to shut off access to the internet, no.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. That concludes your time. We'll continue with Mr. Fragiskatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of you for being here. Ms. Atridis, question on artificial intelligence, in fact. I know you gave a recent interview in early January on how the CRTC was approaching or beginning to approach that question. I ask the question as a parliamentarian, and I think all of us around the table and beyond are concerned about the rise of AI. We see tremendous potential with it, of course, for democracy perhaps, but also for all sorts of benefits beyond democracy, in healthcare in particular, I think. But let's think about generative AI, for example, and what that might mean ultimately for deep fakes, the use of those in election campaigns or between election campaigns, these kinds of things. I know that the European Union is advanced, certainly, when it comes to looking at questions like that. Is the CRTC prepared to delve in further and address the matter?
So I can tell you what we hear about and have been hearing about in our proceedings with respect to AI. Obviously, there's a lot of concern. There's a broad range of views, which is not surprising in the broadcasting sector. We hear a fear that television and movies will no longer be created by humans. There's obviously fear about job loss, which you hear across the board. We've also heard some positive remarks about accessibility and how closed captioning and other accessible tools have been made better because of AI. So we've heard a wide range. We have been asking questions about AI in our most recent decision on the definition of Canadian content. We did include in our decision a reference to, creators should be human and not artificial intelligence. So we have been starting to address those kinds of issues on the broadcasting side.
And that's encouraging, but obviously these risks remain. And again, I look to Europe, where, for example, they've moved ahead and required that the individual or the organization that originates the AI content, the video, in this case, the example that I'm giving, that be made clear. So when it comes to deep fakes, for example, I've mentioned that already. That's where I think the real risk is. If there's risks, all of us do worry about that, and constituents do too. Do you believe that the content creators of AI should be, we should know who's putting out such videos? Should that be required, as Europe has moved in the direction of?
If I may, because we also have questions about AI usage in others of our consultations, which are still open. What I could say is that we're in close touch with our colleagues in Europe. We trade information with them. We're aware we're under different legal statutes. We're building a record around broadcasting in Canada. We're also not responsible for the open internet, and we realize that deep fakes are often shared on social media platforms, which we don't regulate. On broadcasting platforms, we have asked questions around the usage of AI, and we have raised the question about labeling. It is a matter that is still before us, but we're certainly paying close attention to what's happening in Europe while balancing that with our primordial mission to ensure that there's freedom of expression. So we're always balancing those issues.
And I know, and all of us know, that it's a new and emerging area, and so of course I would encourage you to continue to make efforts on that, and it's very good that you're engaged with the Europeans on it. I have about a minute left. Could you touch again on the advances that have been made when it comes to affordability? I'm thinking specifically here about cell phones. This has been an ongoing issue for a number of years. Can you go over the numbers again, Mr. Tridis, on the achievements that we've seen so far?
Well, like committee members, I'm sure we often hear when we are speaking with Canadians across Canada about the challenges in terms of affordability. The measures that we've put in place on, you asked about cell phone services on the cell phone side, where we have allowed competitors to offer more choice to compete using the networks of large telecommunications companies. We've seen a lot of choice come out of that. The StatsCan data that we've seen that I referred to earlier is that from 2021 to 2025, cell phone prices have gone down more than 37%, which is quite significant considering we've seen a lot of other prices relatively stable in the market or going up. So we have seen some positive signs on that front.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fradjus-Gados. On va continuer avec Monsieur Champoux.
We'll continue with Mr. Champoux for 2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you for welcoming me to your committee. a first time for me, but it's not the first time that I've spoken with our representatives from the CRTC, and it's a pleasure to see you again. Mr. Garon is sharing his time with me, and I would like to ask you about independent local news. The CRTC has handed down a decision that made me afraid to join the broadcasters eligible for this group. The CRTC justified Chorus being part of this group, saying that new funding was going to arrive to enrich the program. And the CRTC said that Chorus was a major player, and the funding still has not been seen. So can we have an update? What can we tell to the broadcasters who are having such a hard time keeping their newsrooms open? I can start very briefly to give some context. So regarding news, we have heard Canadians, and we could not agree more. The news is very important. We have taken multiple measures to support news, including our decision on the base contributions. News is very important and deserves our funding. We took one decision for radio, one decision for television broadcasting, and on that I will ask Scott. I have very little time. Scott, I know you can give us really detailed answers, but what I really want to know is the funding on its way? Can the CRTC reassure broadcasters that they will receive that support? That's really the question on all of their lips. There was a decision at the Federal Court of Appeal. When there will be a decision, rather, from the Federal Court of Appeals, the funding will be ready to go. I check 3 times per day on the court's website. That is where the blockage is happening now. At the same time, we are in contact with the Canadian Broadcasters Association to continue having information regarding pressures on broadcasters. I'm sorry, Mr. Shortlive. Thank you, Mr. Champoux.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Commissioner and officials. In September, you appeared at the Industry Committee to answer questions, including questions from my colleague, Raquel Dancho, the member for Kildonan St. Paul. She asked you a series of questions about what the CRTC is doing to crack down on fraud and scam phone calls. You then talked about resources and talked about limitations, but you said that you have a role to play, and I wonder if you can update Canadians on what your office is doing to cut down on the problem ongoing of fraud conducted over the telephone.
So thank you for the question. I mean, this, as we talked about earlier, this is obviously at best an annoyance and at worst fraudulent and criminal. We do have a civil regime that we, together with the Bureau and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we promote compliance with, and there's a lot of education on that front. Anything that falls more within the sort of pure fraud type of activity, that would fall more with law enforcement.
As the regulator, you have a role, though, regulating the companies that carry the phone lines over which this fraud is done. And the amount is not trivial. The estimates are up to $12 billion. All MPs are contacted in their communities by victims of fraud. They tend to be among the more vulnerable in our society, up to the estimate being as high as $12 billion. I think Canadians are looking for urgency on this, not just explanations of all the different jurisdictions. So what is your, can you demonstrate to Canadians the urgency and tell us what, since that meeting in September, what further steps your commission has taken on this?
So we are always promoting compliance and education about scam calls. I would say, and you did mention this, but it is a very small part of our role. The only amounts that we get in terms of parliamentary appropriations from government are it's less than 5% of.
Okay, so are you under-resourced to fulfill this aspect of your mandate?
We work with others to fulfill this part of our mandate, and so we work with partners on this front. So again, what our focus has been is really to help promote compliance, and again, working with our partners on this front to do that.
Okay, are legislative changes needed to give you tools that you need to properly regulate the businesses that through which these frauds are conducted?
So again, we're part of the civil regime that we help promote compliance with CASL, with Canada's anti-spam law. The type of fraud, if you're talking about pure fraud, which more falls on the criminal side, that would be all law enforcement. So even additional resources would not put us in the realm of
okay, but the companies you regulate are on the front line of this, and this is where referral to law enforcement would come into to play, correct? You would refer to law enforcement.
And we do.
Okay, but the vast majority of cases are not even reported. Most victims just don't even report, and prosecutions are I think rare. Do you know if there's a success rate on prosecutions for the referrals that you make?
Again, I think that this would be a better question for law enforcement because our regime is civil. We do
yeah, but
not.
I'm asking how much about the referrals that you make. You said that you're in partnership with law enforcement. So how many referrals have you made for prosecution in the last, I don't know, any year you might be able to track?
So it's complaint based. We should be able to get the information in terms of how many complaints we would pass along to law enforcement.
Okay, please table that.
Okay.
And do you know if there is a success? Are you able to give sufficient evidence for law enforcement and then prosecutions to make the case?
Yeah, the regime we have, and through the Spam Reporting Center, through our arrangements we share complaints received. We are not involved in the prosecution, so we would not have data in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We'll continue with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes now.
Thank you, witnesses. Can you, we've been talking about fraud, so I'm going to just branch out a little from that. On the CRTC's role in controlling sextortion of our youth in Canada, do you have a role to play? And can you speak to that?
My short answer would be no. I don't know if our legal counsel has anything to add on that.
Madam President, I mean, we are a statutory creature. We are bound by the statute, and we implement the statutes that Parliament, in its wisdom, has chosen to provide us the mandate with. And certainly, while that is an extraordinarily pressing issue for all Canadians, it is not within the realm of the CRTC to regulate in that space.
So you would have to you'd have to take direction from statutes to put regulations in place that would make online platforms accountable, because what happens is the bad actors that are from outside of our country, we can't punish them by regular law. We would have to have regulations that would make the platform providers accountable.
It would appear, I mean, when we're talking about issues like sextortion, I mean, those are criminal matters, which would probably be more appropriately dealt with by law enforcement agencies. As the communications regulator, one would think that we have to be bound by the statute for which we have been entrusted by Parliament, and that is, regulating the communication space, ensuring a sustainable Canadian broadcasting system, ensuring, a robust telecommunications system across Canada.
Is it reasonable to think that you could, if you were given the direction, regulate online platform providers so that they would have to deal with the issue of sextortion online?
I'd say we'd be very cautious about speculating about anything we haven't received. I'll also note with what Parliament's given us to date, we have a very limited role with online services. We deal with online broadcasters when they act as broadcasters, but for example, the Act is very clear that we don't deal with social media, we don't deal with the open internet, so we have a very restricted role under our legislation currently.
Okay, I'll pivot to something a little more upbeat. In Budget 2025, Canada has included funding for the Canada Music Fund, the Canada Periodic Fund, and Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage Program. And I think that's just sending out a signal to strengthen Canadian storytelling and creative industries. I'm from Atlantic Canada. We depend tremendously on regional broadcasters and small digital platforms to promote culture in our communities. Can you speak to how the CRTC will be encouraging the creation and distribution of culture through their programs?
What I would say is we've been given the mandate by Parliament to put in place and implement the Online Streaming Act, and that is all about ensuring that there is support for Canadian stories, for Canadian content, Indigenous content. And so that is all of the work that we are doing right now and have been working on, is to ensure that those Canadian stories and that Canadian content is available.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. We will now continue with 5 minutes from Mr. Lawton, please.
Thank you very much. So I want to go back to the Online Streaming Act and what's captured by this, because when we are looking at a streaming platform's offerings that would be subject to this, podcasts would be included in that, correct?
So the policy direction that was given to us by government specifically said that podcasts are not included, and as part of our decision on base contributions, we said that we would not regulate podcasts.
How do you define podcasts? Because there are a lot of shows, again, this would be less germane when you're talking about a Netflix, but when you're looking at YouTube, there are a lot of shows that still have production values, production companies, they are visual entities. How are they excluded, and how is that line drawn in a way that a scripted fictional show is captured, but a commentary show or chat show that isn't news programming wouldn't be?
I want to thank you for the question. Those are excellent questions. We haven't gotten to the part of a regulatory cadre where we've had to define exactly what a podcast is. As we move into that social media space, I think the questions you posed are exactly the questions we want to pose and we want to hear from informed witnesses on. So thank you. Those are great questions.
I was bound to have one or two, but I appreciate that. But again, so you're not actually able to definitively say that certain programs that people would largely see as podcasts won't be captured by this because the lines have not yet been drawn, you're saying?
I think what we can say is we've been clear that we won't regulate podcasts. Therefore, if someone brought us a case that said this is an edge case, our starting position would be if it's identified as a podcast, we would not want to regulate it. We would look at evidence put in front of us, but we've been very clear that we have no intention of regulating podcasts, both based on the policy direction and on our decisions.
Now, as I read the determinations of what Canadian content is, it's supposed to be, for the most part, value neutral. You're looking predominantly at ownership and production, not whether it sufficiently tells the story of Canada. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, it's based on a point system. It modified a point system which has been around for several decades. We did add some bonus points for identifiable Canadian content, and we went through what that means or whether it's based on Canadian book. But it is meant to be neutrally applied. We don't want to get into a case where I or any of my colleagues are saying this is Canadian enough. We want to be able to add up points based on who are the Canadians who are making the content.
So that brings us back to the objective. Is the point of this to ensure that we are creating Canadian jobs and supporting productions that create Canadian jobs, or is it about telling the story of Canada? Because in the messaging from the political side of this, from the government, it was always about ensuring Canadian stories are being told, but you've designed the regulations in a way that is strictly about ownership, and you could have have a Canadian-owned production that's set in New York City with American characters that's trying to get picked up by a U.S. network, it's not actually promoting Canadian identity in any meaningful way.
Well, what I'd say is that our existing rules had always been based on that. We've actually tried to come up with a system now that will encourage more partnerships, and we do now have these bonus points that would recognize certain Canadian attributes. I think that we don't see it as an either or. We believe that if you have great Canadian talent, that will bring more economic opportunity into Canada, and it will allow you to reflect Canadian values and Canadian stories.
So, with what you said in mind about the work in progress on defining what a podcast is, how can we ensure that we're keeping the broadest possible, interpretation of that possible, so that we aren't including, what most people would say are shows that should not be subject to this regime in the same way that, a multi-million-dollar scripted production would be?
Well, what I'd say is because we're still building our regulatory cadre, and as I mentioned, we haven't looked specifically at that question, but anything we do will be based on the public record and on public submissions. In answer to an earlier question we have, that's why sometimes it feels like it takes us a long time, but it's because we need those records before we make decisions so that they will be considered and that Canadians will know that we are basing it on evidence put in front of us.
This legislation now goes back many, many years, and obviously you don't want to rush into the wrong decision here, but why has there not been an accounting for what are pretty core questions that were dealt with when the legislation and regulations were being drafted? Why has that not happened yet?
Well, I think we're trying to take the legislation step by step. We took a look at Canadian content audio visual that we were changing decades worth of practice. We brought in a brace contributions decision that's bringing $200 million into the system. We created a commercial radio news fund. We've bulked up the independent local news fund. We have many more decisions that are coming.
Apologies, Mr. Shortliff. I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you, Mr. Lawton. I will now turn to Mr. Letow for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day and welcome, and thank you for being here. I would like to discuss two different issues, one on communications and the other on radio broadcasting and television. Personally, I've recently changed internet service providers, and everything went fine. And I think that I benefited from the fact that there are new rules, which you've put in place, which allow different companies to use those networks. This certainly worked out for me, and I'm very pleased. However, many individuals in our ridings, for example, say that they don't understand. How is it that you're able to force a business that has invested in the creation of a network to allow its competitors to use that infrastructure? Could you perhaps explain that for the benefit of those at home in my riding? And can you also explain how such a decision improves competition and service for citizens? Thank you. Perhaps I can begin, and I'll ask Scott to take over. This is very important. The work that we do is to promote competitiveness, but at the same time, we also want to really encourage investment. We understand that it is tremendously costly to pay for these networks, so we have many measures in place that go along with our decisions to ensure that investment continues. And I will ask Scott to provide further details. Yes, essentially there are two regimes. One of them is at-home internet and one is cell service. They're slightly different, but the concept is the same for both. For us, we put regimes in place, and yes, we ask those businesses to share their networks, but it's for a certain period. It's to let the bigger providers help try to attract clients and to encourage investments in the networks. And the rules that we put in place are there to ensure that the prices are fair and equitable. Companies have to set prices through the Commission, and we work very hard on that. And we have to make sure that they are able to continue to invest, and not just invest, but also come out on top. So some of them use negotiations, some of them negotiate prices with the CRTC, but it's always very important for us to have that balance. We know that we have to balance competition with different players, and we need to make sure that these services are connecting Canadians all across the country. We all know the major players, but there are also medium-sized companies who have also invested in their own networks. And they're coming out disadvantaged following this new regulatory framework. Could you speak to that? So I can talk to you about the cellular network program. Our measures were to encourage those medium-sized businesses. And I say medium-sized, but we really are talking about giants. And this is to help them get out of their traditional region and invest further. And we're seeing that the competitiveness of these players are having an impact on prices in the market. Very quickly, Mr. Shortliff, we don't have much time. You mentioned discoverability, and it's very important. Could you briefly tell us how you are going to ensure that? You unfortunately do not have the time. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Leitao. Mr. Champoux, will you be taking the speaking time? Why should we cut him off when things were going so well? So we're going to conclude this meeting with you for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. The government has been trying to pass laws on online platforms for 6 years with C-11's, C-18 for the Online News Act. The CRTC was sent these new laws, and it had to comply. And web giants systematically have been fighting against these laws and these regulations. What grade would you give to yourselves, to the CRTC or to Canada, 6 years after Canada began trying to regulate online giants? You can give a grade out of 10 or out of 3 if you want it to look better. Part of my role is to look beyond the CRTC, to look outside at the world. And it's very natural for these stakeholders to be allergic to regulations. And some of our decisions, Scott, I know you well enough to know you won't give a number. I won't give you a number, but I can tell you that we've gone to visit France recently, and there are all kinds of great regulations in place there. But what applies in a different country doesn't necessarily apply here. We do see Canadian success stories and investment here in Canada, so we do have hope. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do have a lot less time than my other colleagues. Something else I notice is that a lot of concessions have been made. So algorithms might have been a problem for secrets that industry players wanted to keep. And blogs were also not covered. So this type of communication, when it comes to consumption of culture, over the past few years, the CRTC is seeing that there's been an evolution in what it needs to regulate. Do you think that, but it would have been such a great answer, Mr. Shampoo, I need to cut you off. But perhaps you can submit it to the committee in writing. But this is not the only sitting of the Finance Committee that we'll have today.
For your presentation and assistance here today. Colleagues, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and see all of you back here in 10 minutes to begin the next meeting of the Finance Committee for today.